we're live right now. I got to interrupt you.
All right. Wonderful.
Super exciting. All right, world. Well, we're back, and I'm super excited because you're sick of me. You already know me, Sam Lichtenstein, one of your directors of analysis. However, I get to be joined today by one of our new superstar analysts, Ali Puchinsky, who is covering all things cyber for us. So, Ali, can you give us kind of just a brief introduction to yourself and your background?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Ali. I received my bachelor's degree from Connecticut College in 2020, and I just finished receiving my master's degree from George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and this is almost my 6th week with the company. And my background is primarily in cybersecurity, U.S.-Russian relations, and U.S. national security more broadly.
So cybersecurity, U.S.-Russia relations, and national security. So 3 topics that definitely don't go together that nobody's talking about.
They slowly merged into one overarching theme for my work and research.
Understandable. I think tragically, it's way too real for people right now. But what's incredible, you said 5 weeks, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Ali must have been with us for 5 months because you've already covered so many topics. And so what I thought would be useful today for our audience, because obviously the cyber world, I mean, we could talk, Ali, for days just on one topic. So let's just do like a brief skim over some of the issues that you've been covering. And I thought kind of one of the most fascinating ones recently, I guess last week you wrote about this new feature that Apple is going to be introducing on some of its new operating system, I guess this fall, which is intended to basically offer some more protections against one of the big issues that we've been covering here at RANE, which is kind of cyber surveillance, things like Pegasus, all these other tools that are been in the news that are targeting mobile devices. So could you talk us a little about this particular thing that Apple has developed and any more broad kind of topics or issues related that you've been seeing so far?
Absolutely. Apple, interestingly enough, has made a big push with its new iOS 16 release this fall to incorporate a lot of new security measures for cyber users. One of which that you're speaking about is the lockdown platform that it's going to incorporate into its phones, which, similar to Do Not Disturb mode or airplane mode, which a lot of users are familiar with that they use in their daily life, this mode will also be available as a temporary service that users can turn on and off. Apple specified that it was really targeted towards these high-profile individuals that may be working on sensitive issues related to political developments, so journalists, activists, diplomats, and essentially this.
So, Ali, you're saying we're not important enough to use this mode?
Well, you know, Sam, you are also extremely important, and I would encourage you to enact this feature if you're ever feeling spied upon. But the new service hinders a lot of conveniences in the phone. So certain attachments and messages won't be available. Receiving calls from unknown FaceTime numbers will be blocked. Several services, such as sharing photos in albums, will be disabled. And essentially, the aim of this new mode is to limit the attack surface that could potentially be penetrated by a cyber threat actor to gain access into a user's device for spyware purposes. So an interesting conversation that this brings up, which is always present in added security, is the convenience aspect. This service is both temporary and, as I mentioned before, results in certain inconveniences for cyber users. So in terms of the efficacy of this new lockdown mode, I think right now it'll be difficult to tell. But given that it might hinder some users in their day-to-day activities, you know, this might not be as attractive as a resource for individuals using their iPhones, even those that may be targeted by spyware campaigns, which is a growing issue. Of course, you mentioned Pegasus, which was probably the top spyware service currently offered, and it's by an Israeli group, and they really claim that it helps limit counterterrorism and certain crime activities by infiltrating these groups and seeing the illicit activity. But of course, now we've seen that a lot of companies groups related to certain governments are purchasing this spyware for maybe more nefarious purposes, such as spying on domestic citizens, potential dissidents, etc.
Well, I mean, I'll confess, Ali, that as we're chatting here, out of the corner of my eye, I can see my iPhone that I've put on silent while we're chatting blowing up from some of our analysts that are probably watching this and yelling at me that I should be downloading this. But it's interesting that you highlight that trade-off in the productivity, convenience, and that's another topic that you've been looking at from kind of a more corporate perspective. What are some of these exploits that we're seeing various cyber threat actors target against corporations that for small businesses versus large businesses, there's inherently this trade-off in like being too protected, and that harms productivity versus not being protected enough. And of course, that leaves you vulnerable. So what are some of the things that you've been looking at in that domain?
Sure. So there's a big discrepancy between sort of the resources that small and large companies can put into their cyber defense systems. Of course, large companies have more resources, they have more personnel, they can afford to have a chief information security officer and a dedicated cyber team to ensuring strong cyber defense. However, small companies comparatively often don't have these resources to really invest in strong cyber defense systems. And you can see that this has had a big effect as ransomware groups are increasingly looking to target smaller companies because A, there's the factor that they might not have the same defense systems, and B, they also are much more unlikely to be able to survive a period of non-operation. Big companies can, not operate for a few days and they'll be able to recover those losses. Whereas a lot of small companies that may be targeted by these threat actors don't have the option to shut down systems or operations for several days and therefore are much more likely to capitulate to a ransomware demand, which then inadvertently proliferates ransomware itself, because even though there is a really big push now in, I would say, the cyber realm to not pay these ransomware requests, because they so often result in further ransomware activities, it's a bit unfair in many ways for small companies to deal with that reality because they don't have those resources. This is also something that's noticeable in the use of open source or proprietary code, which open source code is software that's publicly available and publicly worked on by anybody. And for that reason, it's often quite sophisticated and useful for small companies that don't have the time or resources to build their own proprietary code, but can instead use this open source code to build their products. However, because the source is open, it also has the higher chance of potentially having malware or other issues or exploitative weaknesses in it. And small companies don't always have the time to fully vet open source code before they begin using it in their services, which then proliferates the issue of supply chain attacks, because as one open source code gets infected and then is used by a whole host of companies, this allows a threat actor to not only infiltrate one company, but a wide breadth of companies that then may be working with other companies. And it becomes, a third party / supply chain growing issue.
I mean, it's a snowball effect, to put it in kind of the layman's terms for me, that you have to explain these things. I'll tell everybody that's watching, Ali put together an explainer that I read this morning mistakenly before coffee on quantum computing, which I think after maybe my second cup, I started to understand, but just some of the amazing stuff that you're doing to help explain some of these challenging concepts, because they're super impactful for all organizations, and they're only becoming more so. But I think it's interesting you highlighted ransomware, because of course the cyber criminal world is something that we talk about a lot, very unfortunately, because we have to. I will confess my very niche interest that I think you've started to also write a lot about is hacktivism, and what we are seeing from a whole wide variety of hacktivist groups that aren't necessarily criminal in nature, in the sense that they don't explicitly seek, let's say, a monetary gain, though in some case they're not unhappy to also get some money if that comes about, but really have more of kind of a political, ideological motivation. Is there anything in particular that you've seen recently that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Well, of course, the Russian-Ukrainian war has really opened again the conversation around hacktivism, most noticeably by groups such as Anonymous, which publicly declared war on Russia and Russian entities. And it begs the question of how impactful these groups are, and also what impact they have on the war. One of the Russian defense ministers recently complained that U.S. originated cyber attacks would may result in miscalculation in the war and lead to potentially a wider war. And so with these different groups that have varying motivations and varying capabilities, they have the ability sometimes to result in a lot of damage to other countries. This was noticeable in Lithuania, which recently refused to ship Russian goods in between the country to Kaliningrad, which is a military base of Russia's. And following that announcement, a Russian-backed group, Spetsnaz, declared war on Lithuania and has recently been engaging in a wide variety of denial of service attacks, blocking certain Lithuanian government websites, interfering with certain financial activities in Lithuania. And so hacktivist groups can have a broad impact in ways that I don't think that they always realize or intend to. We're also seeing a bigger push by these individual groups to employ certain ransomware techniques, which is a shift. Typically, hacktivist groups are trying to send a message, potentially denial of service or encryption related activities. But now, for example, a Malaysian group, Dragon Malaysia, has made an announcement recently that they're going to begin using ransomware techniques to really send a message and to bolster their overall hacktivist campaign, which then opens the door wider for whether other hacktivist groups will follow suit and begin to engage in more disruptive campaigns. This was also noticeable after the Roe v. Wade overturn, in which a US-based hacktivist group called SiegeSec announced that they were going to begin attacking certain red states or states that are enacting pro-abortion or abortion laws in general. And so I think the long-term implications of hacktivist groups will really depend on whether they begin to use more disruptive campaigns in their activities.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely wild how many of these groups are out there, and just exactly what you said, are really making themselves a force to be reckoned with in global affairs in ways that may have go far beyond what they originally intended. I mean, if we want to bring in one more actor here, I mean, you have a lot of even nation states that are starting to combine all of these tools. So you have some advanced persistent threat actors that are very clearly linked to Iran that kind of straddle this line between engaging in criminally motivated ransomware, but they're also going after, say, only Israeli targets. So very clearly sending an ideological message. So there's this huge blurring of kind of this space that is intellectually very fascinating, but also from a threat standpoint, like very concerning, because you have all of these different actors with different motivations, many of which are overlapping. It can make attribution, it can make protection, all of these things all the more challenging. And so, for all of our viewers here that want to learn more about these and all the other issues we're covering, definitely check us out. Go to raneworldview.com. You've seen at the bottom of the page for the past 10 minutes. Make sure you come check us out. Ali is routinely publishing cyber-related topics, and there's only going to be, I would think, tragically, from a threat perspective, more for her to be doing in the coming weeks and months. So super excited that you're with us, Ali. And for all the viewers out there, make sure you come to our website, read her work, and everybody have a very nice, restful, and safe weekend.
Thank you for the wonderful discussion, Sam.